Hi everyone, I'm Susan Mulvihill. Well, I took a couple of weeks off from shooting videos, but it's time to get back into the routine. Today's topic is harvesting and storing potatoes, so let's get right to it. The best time to harvest potatoes is when the foliage has gotten frosted and it dies back, and you can see this is certainly the case with this bed here. Now, my favorite tool to use for harvesting potatoes is this cobra head weeder. I find it's really easy to slip it into the soil and hopefully around the potatoes so that I don't cut into them and damage them. But I'll tell you what, it does happen, and so if you accidentally cut into a potato, just trim off the damaged area and use it right away, and that way you don't have much of a loss. Now, this bed contains Viking Purple and Yukon Gold potatoes. And they are varieties that we have grown for years and we absolutely love them. Now, I have a funny story to tell you. You know that I recommend when you plant potatoes to cover the surface of the soil with some type of a thick mulch. And that way, any potatoes that develop near the surface of the soil will not get hit by the sun's rays. The reason this is important is because when they get exposed to sunlight, what happens is they develop a naturally occurring substance called solanine, and it has been determined that that substance is harmful to eat. So I very carefully cover this whole bed with a thick grass clipping mulch. And in theory that should have worked great, but what happened is that the robins kept coming and stealing away my mulch to use in their nests. So I had a really tough time keeping them covered. I do have a couple potatoes that I can now see were exposed to the sun, so those will need to be culled out. Now, I have to tell you, I love digging for potatoes. It's one of my favorite fall chores because it's like digging for buried treasure. You just never know what's under the surface of the soil. So these are Viking Purple, and they have beautiful white flesh, and they're so flavorful. So I just pick around here very carefully to make sure that I at least try not to damage any potatoes. Well, I've gotten the first row of potatoes dug, and I'm really impressed with what I'm seeing so far. These are Viking Purples, and you can see there's some whoppers in there, so I'm pretty darn happy. So here are the Yukon Golds I just dug up, and there are fewer than the Viking Purples because we've been sneaking them for dinner off and on over the last couple of months. Also, the green container is quite a bit larger than the other container, but even so, it's a smaller harvest of Yukon Golds. Okay, the potatoes are harvested, so now what? Well, we need to think about preparing them for storing. You can see these potatoes are quite muddy and dirty, and obviously I want to get as much soil off as possible, but I don't want to wash them because that is not a good idea at all. Instead, what I'm going to do is put them in a shady spot so they're not exposed to sun on a couple sheets of newspaper and let the soil dry so that most of it falls off. After that, I'm going to put them into storage, and I'll tell you the traditional way of doing it and then a way we discovered that makes them last much longer in storage. Once most of the soil has dried and fallen off of your potatoes, it's time to move them into storage. The traditional method is to use a box or a bin, put them in there, and then move them to an area that is dark and cool. In our case, that was our basement. And so for a few years, what we did is we'd put these into a box, move them into the basement, and before we knew it, the potatoes would be getting really rubbery, they'd be sprouting, and they just weren't keeping. So we thought, okay, that means it's not cool enough. So we moved them out into the garage, which gets quite cold. It doesn't freeze out there, but it's very chilly during the wintertime. Again, we had them in a box, put them out there, And once again, they started getting rubbery and they didn't keep long. And we thought, for Pete's sake, this is not the way it's supposed to work. So my husband decided to experiment with something, and it turns out it's worked really well for us. He decided to use some large 5-gallon buckets. He put some lightly moistened straw into the buckets, put potatoes in them, and put them out in our cold garage. And lo and behold, they kept really, really well. They did not get rubbery. And he thinks that what happened is that the moistened straw provided enough humidity so that the potatoes stayed good. Now, we are not experts on this subject. We don't have a root cellar. I wish we did. So obviously we're doing the best with what we've got. But it's something you might want to experiment with too and see how it works for you. But if you do have a very cold area to store them, one that doesn't freeze, you could still use this method and see how it works for you. I hope you found this video helpful. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.